Well, I do a lot of reading beforehand and try to stave off the writing for as long as possible. But so that there's a certain amount of pent-up need to write, you know. But at the same time, I love associative writing, which is when you're researching something and then you suddenly see your character walking down the street in the same milieu as the place that's being described in the nonfiction. And so I really enjoy visualizing the character at work somewhere. So I'll be taking notes and doing some associative writing while I'm doing the research.
I haven't always worked the same way in researching, and some projects have had different dictates than others. Some books have been very research heavy and others have been relatively light on research. Some have required a lot of historical digging or digging into archives, and others have involved research of different types, like interviewing people about, you know, issues of ballistics or something like that I might not find quickly or readily in a book or a scholarly journal or a newspaper or something like that. I generally have been afraid to do a lot of research without writing, as I generally tend to avoid work, and I'm afraid that if I just research, I'll never get to the page. And so most of the time I have a contract with myself, which is that I must start writing immediately and just research as I go. And so most of my books have been researched all along as I went, and the further I get into it, the more specific and directed the research is. I still am a big believer in looking at the books that are on the stacked shelves beside the one you thought you were looking for. I'm still a big believer in poking around and not always being focused on a specific outcome, but being open to kind of lateral or unexpected discoveries. They've helped me a lot in my own writing and in my own ideas in terms of provoking thought about where to take a story. Currently, I'm just about to start a book that I've been researching for about 5 years, but I haven't done a word of in terms of writing, but it's only because I was busy with some other projects. It was a really complex idea that I'm about to start working on, and I didn't want to waste years of trying to gather rare materials when I was finally ready. So since I knew it was coming up in a few years, which is now January, I decided to just collect materials for a few years as I was working on other projects. So that's been unusual for me, because in this case I've been researching before I've written a word of a new novel, but usually I research as I go.
Yeah, usually I sort of choose the premise, choose the you know, what am I going to be writing about, what is sort of the secondary story in the novel, and once I've done that, I do most of the research, and I find it's very good not to do too much. Do what you think is enough, and then start writing. You don't have to be the world's greatest expert in, I don't know, let's say it's a book about something to do with prostitution, let's say. You don't have to become the world's greatest expert in prostitution. You just need to know enough to be able to start writing, and if you need more, you just go back. Because the danger is, if you do too much, if you invest too much time and effort in it, first of all, you tend to lose sight of what people know, like the average person, what do they know about this subject, and forget to put that in, things that people don't know. And also the tendency is to feel that you've invested so much in this research, you have to put it in there, and then the book just becomes boring.
Well, I write in history. So before I can put anything down on a piece of paper, I have to immerse myself in the historical period that I'm writing about. And that happens in two ways. I spend a lot of time in libraries. I spend a lot of time in libraries in Italy, because I write about the Italian Renaissance, and I spend a lot of time in the British Library in London. The British Library in London, I don't know why I don't take a bed, because I'm there so much of the time. And what I do is I read the big story of a period I'm writing about, as if I was doing a course in it at university, right? So I know the political landscape, I know the cultural landscape. And then I start to look at every bibliography and every footnote which is taking me to something that particularly interests me. And from there I will start to take little tributaries into other books. And some of them will be dead ends and they won't work, and some of them will just open up into a lagoon just full of, to mix my metaphors, gold dust. And so I'm a detective, really, through research. I learn as much as I can, then I follow the side notes and follow somebody else's thought process, and I detect the stuff that I need in terms of detail. And it can go on for a long time. And I take notes. I don't do it through computer. It seems to me that if my hand writes a note, it locates in my brain better. And I have books and books that I fill up. And the moment when I know I have to stop, of course it's because I'm petrified, I'll never stop, but is when I start reading things I already know. So I realize that I'm being told 3 facts in the last 2 pages, and I think, yeah, so tell me something I don't know. I've known that for ages. And I begin to realize that I have a base. And at that point, what I do is I read through all of the books that I have made my notes into with a highlighter pen, highlighting maybe quotes, maybe ideas that I've scribbled in, stuff that seems really important to me. I then make sure that I know where each book is in my notebook so I can return to it, and I put all the notebooks on a shelf and I don't go back to them. And then I start on the fiction. And there is always a period of time when it's almost impossible because my brain is still working somewhat more like a journalist, somewhat more like a researcher. And so those first couple of pages, those first jumping off the cliff, you know, as I scream to put words together into a sentence, feels very unnatural and bad. But eventually something will start to write itself. And then I will only go back to research when I hit a problem, when there is something I know I don't know. And sometimes that may happen very early on, and I'll be tempted not to go back to research then, because it will just be too soon. The voice in me which is doing the fiction will still be too young and undeveloped. So I'll just make a note to go back later. I didn't know what a papal galley looked like. Really, if I went back on page 3 to find out what a papal galley looked like, I'd be starting from the beginning again. So I make a note to go back to it. Because they're 2 separate parts of your head. They really are. The bit that learns the facts and the bit that transmutes the facts into fiction. They're both equally important, but I think they have to be kept apart because I think they slightly have toxic effects on each other.